Peace TV English, the solution for humanity.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala ashraf al-anbiya wal-mursaleen. Nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode of a series on Islamic legal maxims, al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyya. In our last episode, we talked about the third of the major legal maxims, and that is al-mashaqqatu tajlibu at-taysir. Hardship begets facility or begets ease. And we talked about the evidence for it and what a major principle it constitutes in the Sharia. Because this principle allows for a relaxation of certain obligations, unusual circumstances, and because it allows for the performance of what are normally prohibited acts due to unusual circumstances, it could conceivably and very easily misused if it is not tacked down or regulated with subsidiary maxims. So the topic of today's episode will be some of the subsidiary maxims related to this major principle. Now, some of these subsidiary maxims restrict the way that it is applied, and some of them sort of zoom in on the kinds of hardship that trigger the easing of normally strict rules. We may not have time to cover all of those today, but we will at least start, inshallah. So the first of these corollaries, the subsidiary maxims, is al-maysur la yasqut bil-ma'sur. What that means is that what is easy does not drop away, the obligation does not drop away due to that which is difficult. So if a person faces difficulty doing an obligatory act, he can do part of it, he can't do all of it, then he is obliged to do what he's able to do. So for instance, he cannot pray standing up. So that doesn't mean that now he's absolved of the responsibility to pray. He can pray sitting down. And if he's unable to pray sitting, then he will pray lying down. And like that, there are a number of simpler and simpler ways to perform the obligation in accord with the level of his ability to do it. So because it's difficult for him to do it according to the most complete method, doesn't mean that he is absolved of doing it entirely. Now, with regard to the ability to do an act, Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah, he looked at it from two angles: the bodily ability to do the act and having access to the external mean that allow for the performance of an act. So because there are two factors that he's looking at, then that yields four possibilities. So if you have the physical ability and the means to do an act according to the normal way that it's prescribed, then of course you have to do it like that. So for instance, you're healthy and you have water, so you're obligated to perform wudu before salat. Now, if a person lacks the physical ability, then that in and of itself is enough to trigger relaxation. So you have water, but that water would make you sick, or you're sick already and the water would make you sicker, or you're sick and the water would delay your cure. So in those circumstances, because you're physically unable to use the water for one reason or another, then you are allowed to use the substitute, which is tayammum, which is to tap your hands on clean earth and rub them on your hands up to the wrists and to rub your face. Now, what if you are physically able but you don't have the means? So, for example, with regard to wudu, you're healthy but you don't have water. So in that case, again, tayammum becomes a fallback option. Now, if you don't have any fallback options, then you're absolved of that particular obligation. So for instance, it's obligatory to cover your body, your aura, when you perform salat. Now let's say that a person was unjustly imprisoned and his captors strip him of his clothing. So now he has absolutely no means to cover his body. So in that situation, what does he do? There is a lot of disagreement about this among the scholars. But the dominant opinion is that because the person, he has to pray, and he doesn't have the means to pray except in the state that he's in, then he performs salat like that. And because he did as much as he was able to do within the limits of his capability, then he's not required to make that salat up later due to the fact that it was missing one of the preconditions for the validity of salat under normal circumstances. Now, this maxim, it has an exception when it comes to acts of worship that cannot be looked at except as a whole. So for instance, if a person is feeling rather ill, but if he pushed himself, he could fast from the start of the fast until noontime, he's not required to do that because Allah only will accept a fast that covers the entire period of time for fasting. So because you can fast half a day, it doesn't mean that you have to fast half a day, because it only will be valid if it's the whole day. So that's a situation in which that maxim doesn't apply. Now, if we look at the authority for this particular maxim from the texts of the Sharia, we see a number of Quranic verses and hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Near the end of Surah Al-Baqarah, it says, "La yukallifu Allahu nafsan illa wus'aha." So what that explicitly says is that Allah doesn't place any burden on people beyond their capacity. What it implies is that He does place burdens upon people within their capacity. So what that implies is that if something is beyond your capacity, you're excused, but if it's within your capacity, you're not excused. So a more direct phrasing of the same concept in Surah Taghabun. فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Keep your duty to Allah to the best of your ability, as much as you are able. And this same concept was reiterated in a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "When I command you to do something, do it to the best of your ability. And when I prohibit you from doing something, then avoid it. So avoiding it was mentioned without to the best of your ability. Because avoiding something means you don't do it. So it doesn't require physical effort to avoid something. It requires spiritual effort when you have an inclination to doing that thing, but it doesn't require physical effort. So complying with a command is based upon ability. So the instruction there is modulated, whereas complying with a prohibition was left absolute in that statement of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, let's take a break and we'll be back in a minute, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Where truth is hidden, misleading quotations create confusion. Where truth is hidden, lack of knowledge and wisdom cause upheaval and commotion. Where truth is hidden, manipulated scriptures and twisted facts emerge. This very hidden truth creates false propaganda, mayhem, chaos, disorder, and turmoil in our lives and the world order. But is there anyone with courage and wisdom? What is the truth, and who has the courage to expose it? Because it's your right to know the truth.
Watch truth prevail and lies perish in Truth Exposed by Dr. Zakir Naik. Every Sunday to Friday at 9 p.m. and repeat telecast at 7:30 a.m. UK on Peace TV.
What would you recommend?
Peace TV presents
What do you have to say about
Learning the Wise Way.
what would you recommend us to take as career?
After we pass our school, so what exactly we should do?
What do you have to say about pursuing two fields together?
Ideas brilliant. Strategy sustained.
The best profession is a profession of a person who invites people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Avail the opportunity with Dr. Zakir.
Depending upon what is your interest. But the main aim should be to spread the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
To implement the convincing Islamic educational formula to excel in your career. Watch Career Guidance every Friday at 6:30 p.m. and repeat telecast at 9:30 a.m. UK on Peace TV. Thursdays provide
In Britain, we are facing one big problem, that are you Muslim or British?
the space to talk.
In India, back home, they ask, are you a Muslim first or Indian first? And we Muslims should know how to reply, how to turn the tables over.
The place to knock.
Why Trinity cannot be regarded in that sense, Father, Son and Holy Spirit?
The opportunity to ask.
But even if we agree that what the Christians say, that he was crucified, so if Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, died for 3 days, who controlled the world? That means even God died?
The freedom to unmask.
So there are various ways which we can prove the argument to be wrong.
Let's meet Dr. Zakir every Thursday at 6:30 p.m. and repeat telecast at 9:30 a.m. UK on Peace TV. Network, the solution for humanity. Let's come under the shade of the scholars.
So the issue is a problem of knowledge.
Asim Al-Hakim.
Why do people do bid'ah?
Imam Malik said, whoever claims there is a good innovation in the deen,
Salim Al-Amri.
he is accusing that Prophet Muhammad did not convey the message.
Dr. Mamdouh Muhammad.
If you know that the Prophet ﷺ did something and I do something else, you have to follow the Prophet ﷺ. Don't follow me.
Abdul Rahim McCarthy.
But if each one believes his goal is to please Allah, to follow the sunnah of Rasulullah ﷺ.
Abdul Rahim Green.
I think this really is to do with your internal state.
Where does the Quran and Sunnah point to?
Muhammad Al-Sharif.
We have to follow what Allah and His Messenger said.
Let's imbibe from these scholars the fruitful solutions for the problems of the world.
Which one we would take and which one we would leave?
Question to every Muslim.
In the shade of the scholars. Next on Peace TV.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome back. So we're discussing the corollary maxim of al-mashaqqatu tajlibu at-taysir, and this is the maxim that says al-maysur la yasqut bil-ma'sur. That which is easy does not drop away, the obligation does not drop away due to that which is difficult. The authority for this particular maxim from the texts of the Sharia, we see a number of Quranic verses and hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Near the end of Surah Al-Baqarah it says, "La yukallifu Allahu nafsan illa wus'aha." So what that explicitly says is that Allah doesn't place any burden on people beyond their capacity. What it implies is that He does place burdens upon people within their capacity. So what that implies is that if something is beyond your capacity, you're excused, but if it's within your capacity, you're not excused. So a more direct phrasing of the same concept in Surah Taghabun. فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Keep your duty to Allah to the best of your ability, as much as you are able. And this same concept was reiterated in a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he said, when I command you to do something, do it to the best of your ability. And when I prohibit you from doing something, then avoid it. So avoiding it was mentioned without to the best of your ability. Because avoiding something means you don't do it. So it doesn't require physical effort to avoid something. It requires spiritual effort when you have an inclination to doing that thing, but it doesn't require physical effort. So complying with a command is based upon ability. So the instruction there is modulated, whereas complying with a prohibition was left absolute in that statement of the Prophet ﷺ. Some other applications of this maxim are, if you go back to the issue of covering your awra when you perform salat. Let's say you're a man and you have only underpants and you're not able to cover that obligatory portion of your awra. So then you are obliged to cover as much of your awra as you're able to. Let's say, another example, a person, he lost some fingers. He had an accident. He lost some fingers, and the wound healed. So now, that's part of the hand, and the hand is supposed to be washed during wudu. So when he washes over the part that is left of his hand. Another example, the Prophet ﷺ, when he made tawaf, he would come around and he would touch the black stone or he would kiss it. So based on that action of his, we know that it's a praiseworthy act to do so. But we also know that it's extremely crowded during Hajj and sometimes also during Umrah. So on certain occasions, the Prophet ﷺ, he would stretch his hand, or he was carrying like a cane or something like that. He stretched it towards the black stone as he was passing, because it's almost impossible to get close enough to the black stone during those crowded periods. Then the substitute is to stretch your hand toward it as you're passing, and that's something that virtually everybody can do. If we look at applications of this maxim in Islamic finance, let's say that a person has taken on a debt and they've agreed to pay $1,000 or whatever on a monthly basis, and a month comes around where he can only pay $500. So because he can't pay the full $1,000 doesn't mean that he should pay nothing. He should pay what he's able to pay. An example that is more complicated and more controversial is, this came up in the context of the Islamic Development Bank. They were extending interest-free loans to projects in Muslim countries. Now, in order to evaluate the projects that were presented to them for financing, and in order to follow up on the use of the money when it was given to these projects, they had to have people working to examine the feasibility of the project and to follow up on it to make sure that the funds were being properly used. And all of that costs money. So the bank came to some Sharia scholars and said, we don't want to charge interest on these loans. However, we also want to cover our administrative costs for doing all of the necessary due diligence that's required in making sure that this money is spent properly and not confiscated, misappropriated, or wasted. So those scholars, who were some leading scholars in the Islamic world, they said, okay, you can cover your actual costs. You can charge the recipients of the financing your actual costs associated with dealing with their particular project. So they said, well, you know, pigeonholing the cost for a particular project are extremely difficult also, because the same employee is working on many projects at the same time, and there are various expenses which are common to many projects. So that in itself is an added cost, trying to figure out how much the costs are for each particular project. So the compromise or the solution that they finally arrived at with regard to this problem was that they looked at all of the administrative costs incurred by the bank in the course of a year. And they looked at all of the projects that they funded. And they distributed the costs, the actual costs of the bank, in administering all of those projects according to the size of the project. So they proportionally divided the costs amongst the projects based on the size of the financing. That was a real application of this maxim, that in that situation the bank is required to do the calculations that will determine what its actual costs are in the year, and to do the calculations that would distribute those costs amongst the recipients in a fair manner. Another application of this would be, a person realizes that some portion of his income is tainted. There's some prohibited elements in the way that some of his income was earned. So in that case, he's not sure, in this particular situation, he's not sure exactly how much that is. So he can't just say, well, I don't know how much it is, I'm just going to blow it off. No. In that situation, he's required to estimate to the best of his ability that which he can, and then he's done what he can in order to absolve himself before Allah. So this is only one of the many maxims that regulate the application of that major maxim, al-mashaqqatu tajlibu at-taysir. Other maxims that are also subsidiary to it are the maxim that says ad-darurat tubihul mahdhurat. Darurat are very pressing needs, kind of crisis level difficulties. So in those situations, that which is normally prohibited becomes lawful for the person in those circumstances. And there is another maxim which is the other lower level of mashaqqa, which is haja. And this maxim says, al-haja tunazzalu manzilat ad-darura. Need, even if it doesn't reach that crisis level, can be treated like darura in the sense that it becomes a means for relaxation of a normally stringent rule. And then you also have a modulator of this concept, ad-darurat tubih al-mahdhurat, which says that ad-daruratu tuqaddaru biqadriha, which means that pressing need must be evaluated and treated according to its degree. So that which is more pressing has to be given more alleviation, and that which is less pressing, there is less room for relaxation. And the level of relaxation depends upon the level of the need. Then there's a further principle that also modulates the way these rules are applied, which is that يُغْتَفَرْ فِي الْوَسَائِلْ مَا لَا يُغْتَفَرْ فِي الْمَقَاصِدِ, which basically means that there's a different level of treatment for primary prohibitions and secondary prohibitions. Inshallah, in our next episode, we'll discuss some of these issues in greater depth. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
إلهي أنت ربي ذو الجلال علمت بما نويت بلا جدال إلهي قد أتيتك فاعف عني وهذا ذل يغني عن سؤال